Welcome to the Servant Leaders Mindset Podcast, where we are changing lives through servant leaders. Up next.
So if you find yourself saying things like, I don't have enough time to fill in the blank, I don't have enough money to fill in the blank, or I make so much money doing this thing, there's no way I could do this other thing that's what I really want to do. If you find yourself kind of blocked in that, then this book is for you. Now, you'll notice I kind of left out the talent area. I just talked about time and money. That's because that's where we think the problem is. The bad news is that's not where the problem is. The problem is the talent component, because it turns out that you're the problem. And you're also the solution. So that's the good news. But what it really is, it's not usually about time or money. It's about our relationship with time and money, how it's showing up in our lives, how we're letting it influence us. Because you can't really manage time or money. They just are. They're finite resources. But what you can manage is yourself.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Lena Holmes, and today's topic is about finding your purpose or your calling in life, as we Christians might say. As a result, I've invited my very special guest, Mr. Scott Maderer. Scott and his wife Carrie have a coaching business that helps clients to discover their callings. They've been in business since 2011, I believe. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
The business is called Inspired Stewardship. Scott and his wife have also written a book outlining some of the strategies that they use to help Christian couples identify their purpose and their calling. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Great having you. So, first, I'd like to start out by asking you to tell our audience a little bit about how you discovered, because it's sort of a discovery process. So you discovered your calling or your purpose in life. What was your journey?
So, and you're absolutely right. I think one thing to make clear up front is I don't think we ever really, quote, find our calling or get there. I think it's a journey or a discovery process, or, peeling back the layers on an onion, whatever analogy you want to use, where we just kind of get more and more information and more aligned. And so for me, my mother will tell you that I've been a coach, I've been a teacher since I was 8 years old. Of course, we didn't call it that then, but, I was always that kid that everybody else came to for help. When you get in high school as a guy, that's not always that great because, all the girls want to come to you for advice instead of dating. But, whatever, it worked out, Later in life, that's good. But, in high school, it kind of stinks. But I did all of that, do that kind of, that was always my approach. Well, I always wanted to help people. So I actually went to school with the idea of becoming a medical researcher. I did research work for a little while, figured out real quick that was really about chasing grant money. Don't like that. So I pivoted. I became a school teacher because that was kind of the family business. My mom, my dad had both been teachers at various times in their life. And, I kind of knew that. Did that for 16 years. Loved teaching. But in that same time, there were the parts of teaching that I loved. There were parts that I don't, just like anything or any job or any career. But I began this process of, as I began to interact with students, of realizing that, there was the stuff I was teaching them, but the really important stuff wasn't the stuff that came out of the book. It was all the other stuff. It was helping them figure out what they wanted to do, who they wanted to be, who they really were, all of those things. And so I began studying leadership. I also became involved in kind of systemic reform and education reform and teaching other teachers and, all of these different things on a national level, and traveling around doing teaching, doing workshops. Kind of fell into it by accident, but loved it. And eventually I left teaching because my wife and I were going through our own financial struggles. We were nearly divorced because of finances. I had a period of time where I was suicidal because of finances. We had a lot of stress and strain around that. I was making about $40,000 a year. We were like $60,000, $70,000 worth in debt. So it's kind of one of these. As a man, I wasn't seeing myself as a good provider, a good husband. We had all of those struggles. And then eventually what happened is we made a change and we started looking at things different. Some things happened to bring some new messaging into my life. I returned to the church and my faith. I kind of drifted away from that over the years. And my wife and I came together and completely changed the way we were living our life. And when we did that, folks started coming to us and going, y'all are weird. Can you help us be weird? And it's basically we just started interacting and teaching. It started as a ministry, and eventually it grew into a business. In the meantime, I changed careers. I'd gone into the corporate world. I'd kind of climbed up the corporate ladder, got up to a fairly high senior position, flying all over the country, big team of people reporting to me, big budget, all of those sorts of things. And then realized that this coaching work that I was doing on the side as a ministry was really much more authentically aligned to how I was designed, what I love to do. That was the part that was feeding my soul. But I was staying in the job because I had golden handcuffs. I felt like I was stuck there, all of these things. And so my wife and I made a very conscious decision for me to climb down the corporate ladder and kind of return to doing the coaching more and more. And as the coaching came up and I kind of reversed the corporate ladder, I eventually left what everyone told me I was crazy to leave because it was a, kind of a dream job. And yet it wasn't what I was supposed to do. And so that's where the coaching business was born as a full-time gig. I'd been doing it part-time before that. And that was in 2017 that I took it full-time. Been doing that ever since. Worked with clients in 20 countries, 38 states, over 1,000 clients, and kind of working in this area of what I call stewardship coaching. So helping folks master their time and their talent and their treasures so that they can do whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing.
Excellent. Very good. So you've authored this book called Inspired Living. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to know, too, you talk about your financial crisis, and a lot of times crisis drives us into that, what is this all about? What is this all for? And I remember reading a book, I guess I must have been maybe in high school or maybe first year college, by Viktor Frankl that talks about man's search for meaning. And it's just sort of this, whether you are a spiritual person, a Christian, or whatever, of some other faith, there's this thing that's built inside of us, I believe. So if we kind of start with that premise that the Creator put this thing in us to kind of go through this discovery process. So having said that, laid that for that premise, who did you write this book for? And what is the overarching takeaway that you want your readers to know?
Sure. So, the book was written, obviously, like any person that's ever written a book will tell you, I think anyone could get benefit from it, but that's never the right answer, right? So the real truth is I wrote the book for folks that were struggling and feeling that feeling of either I don't have enough time to do what I'm supposed to be doing, or I don't have enough money to do what I'm supposed to be doing. It could be not enough money, or it could be golden handcuffs. That was kind of my situation. I felt like, here I am making big six figures, lots of responsibility, all of that. There's no way I could leave this. It's providing, and how could I do my own thing? And in my case, the calling was to do my own thing. And that isn't true for everybody, but it's true for a lot of people. So those areas are kind of the symptoms. That's what shows up a lot of times in our mind. That's the excuse. That's what we'll tell people. So if you find yourself saying things like, I don't have enough time to fill in the blank, I don't have enough money to fill in the blank, or I make so much money doing this thing, there's no way I could do this other thing that's what I really want to do. If you find yourself kind of blocked in that, then this book is for you. Now, you'll notice I kind of left out the talent area. I just talked about time and money. That's because that's where we think the problem is. The bad news is that's not where the problem is. The problem is the talent component, because it turns out that you're the problem, and you're also the solution. So that's the good news. But what it really is, it's not usually about time or money. It's about our relationship with time and money, how it's showing up in our lives, how we're letting it influence us. Because you can't really manage time or money. They just are. They're finite resources. But what you can manage is yourself. And so the takeaway for the book, that's really the main takeaway, is to step back and start looking at things from a point of view of what can I do? What is in my control? What can I start making shifts in so that not like you said in one big jump. It's not an event, it's a process, but so that over time you can begin to move your life more in alignment with those things that you want to be doing, that you're called to do, that you're designed to do, and less of those things that you're not called to be doing. They never go away to zero. Guess what? The laundry still has to be done, whether you have a calling to do laundry or not. But there's still, you can get more and more of it and be more and more aligned if you work to do that over time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like the fact that you use this analogy of a puzzle and in the book, and you explain how the picture, because it's really all about perspective, right? A lot of people say mindset, but really it's about what you see, and how once you make a shift in that perspective that you might have, which is a perspective that most of the times is not even true. It's how you see yourself. It's not how perhaps others see you. So can you explain how you use that analogy of a puzzle? I loved it. It was really great to describe what it means to find your purpose.
Mm-hmm. So we actually use that. The subtitle of the book is Assemble the Puzzle of Your Calling by Mastering Your Time, Your Talent, and Your Treasures. And so it is this idea of a frame or a picture, right? When you sit down to do a puzzle, the first thing anyone does is puts the edges together. Right? I mean, 99.9% of the time, there's probably one weirdo out there that doesn't do it this way, but all the rest of us, we look for the edge pieces. And I think our life is kind of the same way. You can begin to kind of define what the edges are. What are the things that inside of this frame is my life, and outside of this frame is the stuff that really doesn't matter to me. It's not important to me. Doesn't mean it's not good for somebody else, but for me, it's things that they don't currently belong in my life. And then you begin to assemble the inner pieces, the details, the more fine-tuning things. Now, that's the analogy. The other thing, though, when you need to do a puzzle is, what do we have? We have the box. Mm-hmm. And on the outside of the box is a picture. And we're kind of trying to make the picture on the puzzle match the picture on the box. And so I think it's also important that we do some reflection and some work to visualize and picture and frame what is it that you want your life to look like? What do you want it to look like? Now, here's the cool thing and the not cool thing about using this as an analogy for calling. The puzzle picture on the box changes, and sometimes there's pieces missing, and sometimes you've got extra pieces, and maybe you get in a relationship and now you got two puzzles that are you kind of mix them all into one big box and you're trying to figure them out together. So it's not as simple as a quote old-fashioned jigsaw puzzle, but I still think the analogy works of realizing that it is this process of discovering and framing the picture and then building the details, as opposed to just kind of, I think a lot of times we think of things as, they have to happen in these overnight light switch, turn it on, turn it off, everything changes. And that really doesn't happen for most of us most of the time. Again, I hate saying it's impossible, because you'll go find me the one exception to that rule, but most of us, it's a gradual process, not an event that really fixes our life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and also, I think there's a lot of frustration, and we all know AI is here, and it's not coming anymore, it's here. And we know that it's going to change our lives in a very rapid way. And so a lot of people are going to have to come to this point in their lives to thinking about what are they going to do next. Mm-hmm. Many people are going to lose their jobs. I mean, a large percentage of people. So they're going to have to go back, and they're going to be forced to do introspection. So how is your book that we've all read these books, 10 ways to do this and 25 keys to that, and how is your book different from those books? I see it as being different, but how would you say that they're not just picking up another book, or they're going to another coach who's going to try to say, you're going to make this change? And I like the fact that you emphasize that this is a process. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you're willing to go through the process, you're able to execute the destiny that you see before you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is, there's a few things different. I think a lot of the books that are out there, what's happened is someone has done something and they found something that works for themselves. And then they sit down and they go, okay, this worked for me. Now, if you go do it, it'll work for you. And the problem is that if you're not in exactly the same situation as a starting point, and if you don't have exactly the same destination in mind, parts of it may work, but the odds of all of it working for you are pretty slim, And a lot of times that's our frustration with these books is they come in and they kind of say, here's the way, follow the way. Well, what I tried to do different is I tried to make this more of a workbook to teach frameworks and processes as opposed to tools, right? Mm-hmm. So a tool is the way, I hand you a hammer. There's pretty much one way to use a hammer that's right. There's a couple of things you can do with it, but for the most part, that's it. You're not going to use a hammer the same way you would use a weed eater. They're completely different tools. They have completely different functions. And if I hand you a hammer and what you needed was a weed eater, you're like, why'd you hand me this? This is not helpful. So instead, this is more of a framework, a process of sitting back and going, hey, what is the tool that you actually need right now? What is going on in your life? What are you trying to change? How are you looking at it? And what can we put in place from a framework or a process that works regardless of the exact specifics of your situation, regardless of the exact specifics of the tools that you use? So as an example, one of the frameworks is this idea of first we invest in ourselves, then we invest in others. And naturally, if you kind of do that process of you learn something, you get better at something, and now you go put it into somebody else, then what happens is you begin to get influence. Because naturally, if you're impacting other people in that way, you've got influence. And when you have influence, that's what creates the impact. And so it's invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, impact the world. That works regardless of whether you're working at it in a corporate environment, whether you're talking about it as a parent raising kids, whether you're talking about, it's the same framework regardless of the situation. And so that was kind of the approach, and the difference is rather than teach the tools or the way, I tried to show frameworks and processes that would apply and then how they would apply in a lot of different situations.
Yeah, I think that's great. Also, in your opinion, do you think that our callings or our purpose changes over time, or do you try to discover, like you talked about this, you alluded to this a little bit, talking about while you're working on the puzzle, things changes, there are pieces missing, and you kind of fill in the gaps as you go along. But also, you start out with one thing, but there's this overriding theme in our lives that we kind of discover that you were saying, well, basically what I was doing was coaching people all along. I was just doing that in other ways. I had different platforms in which I did that, but the overriding theme. So do you think, this is a common question that people ask me, and that is, does your purpose change over time? I don't know, it's just my opinion that it doesn't necessarily change. You do have orientations in your life, I believe. Right. And it's to tease those things out and discover those. What do you say about that?
So I think there's a couple of things going on. And so first, I want to actually step back and kind of define calling a little bit, just because, at least for me, if you understand what I'm talking about, it'll help my answer make more sense. So a common confusion, and I even kind of alluded to it earlier, is we equate calling with the thing that we get paid to do. Mm-hmm. Those are actually two different things. And so, in fact, the words for them are different in the English language, though we treat them the same. So the word that we would use in English for the thing that you do that you're called to do is vocation. But the thing that we would use for the thing that you're paid to do is career. We use those words interchangeably. They actually mean two totally different things. So a career comes from the root word for cart. A cart is something that moves you from point A to point B. So your career is something that just moves you through your life, okay? But your calling, the word vocation, comes from the word vocalization, vocal, right? Vocal means to be spoken. The implication there is something is spoken into your life. Now, I'm a person of faith. I believe that God speaks into our life, but I don't care what language you use or whatever thing. It's the thing that you've, because of your environment, because of your genetics, because of how you were created, it's the thing that you're wired to do. And if that's true, then that doesn't just show up in your career, that shows up in everything. That shows up in how you handle your money. That shows up in how you're a parent, how you're a spouse, how you're a volunteer, how you're a pet owner. I don't care, right? Mm-hmm. No matter what it is. That, if it's really that deeply wired into you, then it shows up in everything you do, including your career, but other things as well. And so when you start realizing that, I don't think it's that our purpose changes, but I do think we're not capable of discovering it in this flash of lightning. It is a process of discovery and uncovering and refining and, even learning the language that we can use and how would we describe it and all of those things. That takes time. It's there all along, but we can't see it yet. We don't have the experience. We don't have the language. We don't have the depth to really fully see it. And I'll be honest, I'm 57 years old. I think I've done a pretty good job of spending a lot of time and energy working hard to discover things. I don't think I'm done yet. I have a feeling when I'm 80, I'm probably still going to be discovering some new things. It just seems to be the way it is. And I don't think of that as a bad thing or it doesn't mean I'm missing anything today. It just means there's more to experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's pivot a little bit here in terms of, you talk in your book about hindrances or limiting beliefs and how those are stumbling blocks to you being able to discover your purpose. And you have what you call the 3 Ps. Mm-hmm. Personal, permanent, and pervasive.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you tell our audience a little bit about that mindset and how those particular 3 Ps actually hinder us from discovering who we are?
Absolutely. And this is something that I think a lot of us deal with. We hear all the time about limiting beliefs or things that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves. You alluded to it earlier. We see ourselves a certain way, and that's just not true. Everyone else would see you differently, but this is how you label yourself. So these internal beliefs are very important because oftentimes what you believe becomes your reality. Mm-hmm. You create your own reality in a very real sense through what you believe is true. And so what I tell people to look out for is the 3 Ps. So permanent, personal, pervasive. So take them one at a time. What happens is something happens to you, and the first thing you do is you personalize the experience. So you failed at doing something. Maybe you were trying to start a business and the business failed and you've now had to close the business. Instead of saying the business failed, you say, I failed. I am a failure. I have failed at business. That I statement is making it personal. It's no longer about the business. It's about you. You're a failure. You've taken on that identity. And then a lot of times you'll do another step. You'll make it permanent. So it's not only I failed at business, it now becomes I fail at everything all the time. I fail every time I try to do this. I fail at every time I do anything. So you're making it personal and you're making it permanent. It becomes an always kind of situation. And then the third is pervasive. So it's not always I fail every time. It's I fail at everything too. I failed at this and I fail at everything. And the interesting thing about that is if you stop and think, if you've made something that absolute of a statement, if there's literally one thing that you've succeeded at ever in your entire life, that statement can't possibly be true. It can't be everything if there's one exception. It can't be always if there's one exception. And it can't be your whole identity because, again, there's something you've succeeded at. So how can that be true about you in all ways? Because when we make it personal, we're taking it on as our identity, who we are. And so when you start realizing that, wait a minute, these absolutist statements are in our brain. And by the way, they're there for a reason. They're there to be protection. They're trying to protect you from embarrassment, from harm, from failure. They're trying to protect you from being ostracized from the tribe, and you've embarrassed yourself so badly that now no one will talk to me. This is the stories we tell ourselves. Everyone sees me as a failure. No, they don't. you know but yet that's what we internalize, and when we internalize it, then we start living it out and actually making it true. We start taking on the behaviors and the attitudes and the actions and doing and not doing things that we should be doing that would help us change. And so a lot of times it's stepping back and recognizing when those 3 P's show up, or any one of them, that can't possibly be a true statement, and look for the factual, look for the enabling truth, look for the thing that says, wait, that's not always true. And when you realize that it's not always true, you can begin to reprogram your mind so that when those thoughts show up, it's more like, oh, that's just showing up because it's trying to protect me. But you know what? I need to do this anyway. And you can begin to kind of move forward through them. Now, it's never easy. Don't get me wrong. Everything I just said sounds easy. It's simple in that you can understand it, but it's not easy to do. And that's where a lot of times having masterminds or coaches, or sometimes even your spouse, having other people that can speak into your life and remind you of these things can be really helpful, because it is hard for us to do it for ourselves in our own brain.
Absolutely. And I like what you said, because leadership does start with self-awareness.
Absolutely.
You have to be aware of what you're actually thinking and what is true and perhaps what isn't true. That kind of leads me to also a little bit, you and your wife, you work with couples. Mm-hmm. So that's probably a very interesting dynamic. But how do you work with couples? Do you work with them as individually, or together, or both? And also, how do you help them to, I know you use the DISC method, I'm very familiar with that, and the Strength Finder and all that, but how do you help them to recognize and appreciate and celebrate the gifts that they and talents that they bring to the table as individuals, but yet operating as one in a marriage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of that it comes down to having communication and clarity, right? That's the most important things. And it's also the thing I think that couples a lot of times struggle the most with, because, we all are busy doing our thing. We're raising kids, we're working, we're doing all of these things. And it's so easy to neglect, again, that self-development time. And so what I look at it as, a lot of times I coach couples together. Sometimes I coach them individually. Sometimes I do both. So there is no one size fits all. It kind of depends on what are their goals, what are we trying to achieve, and how, what's the best way to do it for this particular couple. But regardless, the points that we're trying to arrive at is, first off, recognizing that if there's 2 of you in a marriage and y'all were 100% identical, you thought the same, you acted the same, you believed the same, you did the same, everything was the same, one of you's not needed. Okay? You're just spare parts, So the fact that y'all aren't the same is a beautiful gift, that honestly, in some ways, a single person doesn't have that advantage. They have to create that in other ways. You've naturally got a partner there that has some giftings that you don't have. And that should be a blessing, not a frustration. And yet often it becomes friction and frustration, because it's like, well, I'm a saver and you're a spender. And so now I feel mad at you for spending, and you feel like, you're a tightwad because you never want to do anything, and now we're in a fight, conflict, when in reality, it's about stepping back and going, okay, what are our big picture goals? What are we trying to achieve? And realizing that if you're in a marriage situation, and regardless of kids, there's kind of 3 different people that have to be developed there. So you talked about the first step of leadership is self-awareness. So if you stop and think about a marriage, you've got the husband, okay, or the wife, and you've got their partner, the husband or the wife, but then you've got the marriage. And that marriage is actually, it's like a living person. It has its own identity. It has its own values. It has its own self-awareness. It has its own priorities. It has all of those things. And you've got to sit down and figure out a way that how can all three of these get the time they need, get the attention they need, get the communication they need. And a lot of it is sitting down and thinking it through, talking it through, writing it down. This is why I'm a big proponent of family mission value, mission statements and value statements, where families sit down and go, this is who we are. And then when you have kids brought in, it's like, yeah, teach the kids that too, and the kids can recite it and tell you who you are. Because once you've got that identity in mind, now all of a sudden you can each grow as individuals and you can each bring your own giftings and your own strengths and your own messaging, but you've also got that common view of what the family is, what the marriage is, and where are we headed. And now it's almost like three oxen attached to the cart. It's three times as strong as it would be if there's three people, two of them moving in one direction and the marriage kind of meandering around in the middle. You don't get anywhere. But when everybody's aligned and moving the same direction, not only can you get somewhere, you can get there really quickly. And I've seen folks turn around situations that, from the outside looking in, you're like, wow, this is going to be rough. And then once they get aligned and start pulling, it's like, wow, they accomplish so much so quick, because alignment means momentum and they move forward.
Absolutely. And I love what you said too, that a lot of times people, they go into corporate life and they do understand how core values drive an organization, but they don't understand how those same core value alignment would actually benefit them in a marriage or in a family situation. So
yep.
I like that.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that we actually do in business, about teamwork and creating teams and communication and core values and mission statements. And, and don't get me wrong, I've worked, in a lot of different environments, and sometimes that's actually done well. And sometimes companies do that.
Absolutely.
And it's, just face value to, lip service to something. And it's the same way in a family. If the family does it well, it aligns the family and they move together. If the family just does something and pays lip service to it, it doesn't work for them either. So it isn't just the act of doing it. It is the act of doing it with intentionality and seriousness and taking that gravitas, that it really deserves. Because again, somebody out there is thinking, yeah, my company has a mission statement and it doesn't help them. Because it's not about the mission statement. It's about the process that they're going through that's actually important.
Absolutely. And it's about, like you said in the book, it's about execution. It's that gap between actually establishing what you say you want and then going and executing that. That's two different things. Both are a process, just to even establish this is what I value the most, so that if I'm going along, if I find something that doesn't align with that value, then I'm in value conflict. This is never going to work. So, you go ahead and make the adjustments as you go along the way. So
I either got to get rid of the thing or I've got to change the value.
Absolutely.
And either one is okay. You could do either one. This is the tension we have in family and corporate leadership, all of these things, of where we'll state a value as this is important. But then we begin to live in a way where that doesn't show up. Mm-hmm. And that cognitive dissonance, that feeling of,
Absolutely.
But I'm saying this is true, but it's not true because of my actions, that's what drives us batty. That's what drains us. That's what, that'll kill a company. That'll kill a family, because you can't live out of alignment forever without that just dragging down your heart, your soul, your spirit, because you're sitting there looking at yourself going, I'm lying to myself every day. And at some point, you just can't do that anymore. That's why the old joke of, tell me all day long what's important to you, but if you really want me to see what's important to you, give me your checkbook, give me your calendar, mm-hmm. Let me see where you're spending your time, let me see where you're spending your money. I'll tell you what's important to you.
Absolutely. And so that's a good segue to my next question, is that what role does prayer play in your coaching business? And also, how do you help your clients distinguish? Because of course, this is a process, they're going through the discovery. How do you teach them to, how does the discipline of prayer have an impact on the discovery process? And how can they distinguish the difference between God's voice and their voice?
Yeah. Or last night's pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes I've had that voice where it's like, is that? Yeah, no, that's just, never mind. But and I do think that's a hard thing. So, for me, obviously, prayer is something that I do. It's something I do every day. It's a spiritual discipline. I don't demand that all of my clients pray. I have clients that are of faith, and I have clients that aren't. So it's not a rule that you have to be of faith to work with me. But as I tell them, this is my worldview. This is, I come at things with this worldview. So I'm going to use examples and I'm going to reference God. If that bothers you, I'm not the right coach. I'll help you find somebody else. But if you're okay with that, then we can work together. And what's interesting about it is, again, whatever language you want to use, I think a lot of times we confuse prayer with asking for something. And that is a type of prayer. We call it intercessionary prayer, that we're interceding on the behalf of somebody else to pray for something that they need or that we need. And it is a true type of prayer. But I think a lot of times that's it. That's where our prayer process stops. We spend all of our time going, God, give me this. God, show me this. God, help me with this. God, tell me, And if you stop and think for a minute, anyone out there who's a parent, when your 3-year-old is doing that to you, at some point you're like, look, I just go away. I'm not going to listen to you anymore. It's like, I don't, you're going to have to, let's work on this a little bit, because you can't need everything. And I think we kind of do the same thing in our prayer life. And so one of the things what I encourage people to do is find a way, in prayer, in meditation, in spiritual disciplines, to just shut up and listen. To create white space. You work with leaders. For leaders, this is so important. I see leaders who every minute of every day is filled up with stuff, and they never have any space in there to think. And then they wonder why they are never, they're always behind. You haven't created any white space to listen and to get inside yourself and to, in my case, pray and not pray, give me this, but pray, show me this, reveal this to me, to give me wisdom to see what I'm supposed to do, or maybe that I'm not supposed to do anything. Give me the wisdom to sit still and not take an action. And what I'm looking for is a sense of peace, or a sense of contentment, a feeling of not necessarily I could do this or I've got this, but more of a, yeah, that's frightening, but you can do, that's the right direction. Typically for me, a lot of times I'm being asked to do things that I actually think are beyond me. They're not they don't necessarily are things that I feel like I'm already prepared to do. And yet I still have a sense of peace about it. I still have a feeling of this is the right direction to go. And it's okay that I don't have all the tools in place yet. It's okay that I don't know all of the answers yet. Because I think often, what we're hoping is what will come down from heaven as this stone tablet with all of the steps and all of the challenges and all of the ways that you will overcome it. And I don't think that's what God asks us to do. I think God is just there going, no, just take one step. You don't have to see the whole path. You don't have to have all of the answers. Just take one step. You just have faith, have confidence, and take one step. Don't worry, I got you. I'll be there. And to get that sense of peace, you've got to stop asking and talking all the time and start listening and creating the space and the time to do that. And again, that could be a business, that could be life, but we're also busy all of the time now that we fill every minute of every day with noise, and then we wonder why we can't hear.
I like that. That's good. That's really good. So finally, my last question for you is that you argue in your book, and this is all part of putting the pieces together, all part of the process, these components, but they come together, through the coaching process. But you argue that, and I argue this all the time too, junk in, junk out, you have to form good habits. Mm-hmm. And of course, you're going to have to learn some things and unlearn other things. And so that process of eliminating or trying to reform a habit, a good habit, or trying to get rid of a bad habit. Can you talk a little bit about that to the audience, what they
Sure.
can at least begin to start to do in order to develop good habits? And I like
Absolutely.
what you said about, because we're such an information age now. We're taking in all of this. A lot of times I just have to shut off the news. It's
Yep.
like, okay,
Turn everything
you said
off.
that. Yeah, yeah. That story went around in a circle about 5 times, and I heard it 5 times. It's kind of like you have to really close out the noise. And this gets to what you were saying earlier about noise. So, yeah, how do you start to form those good habits and eliminate those bad habits?
So the first thing, again, is awareness, right? I think so many of us have habits that we don't even realize that we have. So the way that you get up in the morning, the way that you get ready for work, the way that you do certain things all day long, those are habits. And, if you find yourself, basically a habit by definition is there's a cue or trigger, then there's a response, okay, and then there's a reward. That's really it. There's 3 parts to any habit. Cue, something that says, go do this, and it could even be unconscious. A lot of times it's something that doesn't even reach our conscious awareness. Activity or action, we do this in response. Reward, and that reward is a lot of times a dopamine hit. It's in our brain. It's a chemical. It's not necessarily anything real. So sometimes it's an external reward. Every day at noon, I hear that alarm outside. I go to the kitchen. I get a cookie. That's a cookie is the reward, right? Go to the kitchen is the action. The noon alarm going off is the cue. But sometimes it's as simple as I see the little red number on my phone that I've got an alert. That's the cue. The action is go check the messages. And the reward is the little dopamine hit I get of, oh, look, I looked at something on Facebook, And by the way, Facebook has spent millions of dollars to make sure that works. They've designed it that way. So it's these things are our habits, and a lot of times we're unconscious of them. So the first step is being conscious of them, paying attention. Once you start identifying them, then it is a matter of going, is this a habit that is adding value to my life, or is this a habit that's taking value away? If it's a habit that's adding value, what can I do to make it even easier to do that habit? And if it's a habit that's taking value away, what can I do to begin to shift that habit? So again, there's lots of tools and techniques, but let's talk about a framework, because again, I want this to apply no matter what you're doing, no matter what habit you're talking about. So I talk about it in terms of smoothness and friction. If it's a habit that you want to do more of, do everything you can to make executing that habit as smooth as possible. That could be creating a new habit, or that could be reinforcing an old habit. Doesn't matter. You want to smooth it out. So as an example, let's say you want to start going for a walk every morning when you get up. Well, right now, I discover that when I get up in the morning, I have a tendency to hit the snooze button, 4 or 5 or 6 or 22 times, right? Like a lot of us do. What can I do to make it smoother for me to get out of bed and get moving? Well, I know I can move the alarm clock across the room. That creates friction around the habit of hitting the snooze button. It makes it harder because it's way over there. And it creates smoothness that gets me out of bed, because I have to get out of bed to go over there and turn the alarm off because it's making a bunch of noise and it's bothering me, and so I do that. Oh, what's more, let's take another step. Let's lay our walking clothes right out beside the alarm clock. So now when I get out of bed and go over to turn off the alarm clock, I look down and there's the shorts and the jeans or whatever I'm going to go walking in. There's the tennis shoes and all of that. They're right there. Oh, and there's a snack bar and a bottle of water that I prepared the night before. So I have no excuse. I can grab the snack bar, I grab the bottle of water, I put on my shorts, I put on my shoes, and I go for a walk. I've made it as smooth as possible to take the action. And if it's something I don't want to do, again, the snooze button, I create friction around that. And so the neat thing is, if you start thinking about how can I go back to the cookie situation. Every time that alarm goes off, I go and get a cookie. Create friction around getting a cookie. Don't buy cookies, you know, just don't have them in the house, or put them up on the top shelf where you have to climb up on a ladder to get them. And that slows you down enough that your brain's going, do I really want to get the cookie? Put the apple slices on the bottom shelf, where they're really easy to get. So if you start thinking about creating friction and smoothness around your behavior, it allows you to start looking at those habits, and over time, you reprogram your brain to begin to do more of the stuff that you want to do and less of the stuff that you don't want to do. Here's the warning. Everyone always hears, it takes 22 days to form a new habit. No, it doesn't. It takes a lot longer than that. It takes more than 90 days. Okay. Some studies show as much as 360 days for some habits. It can take a long time. And what's more, if you allow yourself to slip and go back into the bad habit, you can restart a bad habit in about 10 days, So it's like your brain goes right back into that old wiring, because think of it almost like your neural pathways. It's almost like a river channel. And the longer you've been doing that bad habit, the deeper that channel is. And then you come in and you divert the river. You put a dam and you divert the river and you're starting a new channel. It doesn't take much effort to punch a hole in that dam and everything goes back into that old channel and the water starts flowing in the deep channel again. It's the same thing for habits. So what that tells you is, again, this is simple to talk about. It's hard to execute. It's not easy. And have some grace for yourself. Realize you're going to fall off the wagon. You're going to take a step backwards. You're going to have that one day where you get up and you don't go for a run. That's okay. That doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean you're never going to be able to change your habit. It doesn't mean you can't change any habits. We're back to the 3 Ps, right? It just means, okay, you didn't go for a walk that morning. Get up and do it tomorrow. And the more you do that, the more those new channels form and the stronger that dam gets, and it almost fills in the old channel. And eventually, over a long period of time, you've got a whole new set of habits. And those channels are now the primary channels. And that's kind of the default for your brain. But it can take a lot longer than people think.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah. So if people are interested in learning more about what you do or want to take advantage of your coaching materials, your book, etc., what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So I actually put together a landing page for your listeners. So if you go over to my website at inspiredstewardship.com and then just /servant leaders, you'll find there all of the stuff that you just talked about. There's some free resources you can get. Some of these activities and frameworks that I was talking about are there for you to access for free. There's information about my book, my own podcast, and as well as how you can jump on my calendar if you'd like to talk. Not for me to sell you anything, but just if you have questions about anything I said today and want to chat, I'd be more than happy to chat.
Excellent. Well, my goodness, Scott, you have been a tremendous guest. You've shared some very valuable information with our audience to get started with changing their lives and discovering their purpose. And so thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a delight to have you.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed being here.